Hello and welcome to Spirit Sherpa, the show that helps and encourages you on your journey to unlock your magic mojo. I'm Joshua Radewan, here with transformational coach and transformational shaman, Kelle Sparta.
You change that every time.
I do. We're in the flow. I'm in the feminine on Walkabout. Things are just going with
Baby.
what it is.
Yeah, we are rocking and rolling. So yeah, yeah, you're still on walkabout over there.
I've made it 10 miles in 5 days. it's more like crawl about at this point. I am. I got to the mountains in Virginia, and this is whatever for whatever reason grandmother spider's kind of keeping me right here, and yeah, I went to Natural Bridge, Virginia, which I recommend anybody going to. Andrew, or was it, no, Thomas Jefferson actually owned this for a while, and but there's like this huge portal here that I felt, and the energy I've only felt one other time, and when I was in Lake Tahoe, right? Like like you feel it coming up, and you can see all. I mean, like if you're aware, you can see all of the faces in the mountains, and it's just it's a beautiful spot that ends. It's a 2 mile hike that ends at a waterfall, but I highly recommend it. Like it was very cleansing, very clearing, and I guess that's what this whole journey's been about. So yeah, I am. Well, I'm currently on crawl about until the energy opens back up. But I'm right where I need to be. I think some of it's setting down to integrate too. It's hard to ground. It's even hard to center when you're constantly on the move.
Yes.
So I sometimes spirits like, hey, like how about like you don't just keep going. You just stop for a
Well,
bit.
you are also working on foundational deconstruction, which is really tough to do when you're moving all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a
So
it's a great way to bypass it. That's what they tell me.
yes.
You gotta
Yeah.
sit down and just feel that out. I'm like, well,
Maybe, maybe not.
maybe, maybe not. Pouty face.
Got enough. Thank you very much.
Yeah, yeah. So it's,
All been there, baby. We've all been there.
we've all been there.
Yeah, oh my God, we've all been there. I mean, oh my God, so many times. I'm just like, they're like, you can do this. And I was like, no, no, I'm not doing this.
I'm past the point at yelling and screaming at them like a
Well,
pouty
that's
teenager,
progress. Yep. I
but
did that
I'm
for
I'm
5
still
years.
like I I know you guys have my best interest at heart, but I'm going to need more options, like, because I remember you telling me that, like, towards the end of Walkabout, you're like, they kept wanting to send you to like music festivals. And I was on the ocean a couple days ago, which was, or a few, I guess a week now, which was cool because two dolphins swam up to me, which I was like scared
Nice.
shitless at first because I only saw fins coming
Oh,
out. But like I met a couple people from the Rainbow Gathering, and they were trying to get me to go, and I was like, I don't think so. I don't think that's me. I was like, I don't feel like this is the path.
yeah,
No
no.
offense to anybody who does that. I'm just not
No,
the.
but the
That's not
Rainbow
my.
Gathering is very much filled with people with poverty consciousness because it's all about we pay for nothing, right?
Yeah,
So
I
it's
guess I
it's
didn't know
the
much about it.
antithesis of where you're going. So
Yeah,
not really your best choice.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I didn't feel like that was the next place the spirit was trying to lead me. So I,
Yeah.
decided to hole up in Virginia for 5 or 6 days.
Okay. So, yeah. So today we're going to talk about. Today we're back to Elizabeth, who is the goat. Man, she is the person who keeps giving us these great ideas. She sent us a link last year, actually. That was a link to an article about how people on a Vipassana retreat had psychiatric breaks, right? They had mental breakdowns, and they had a couple of people killed themselves and things like that because they would get to, they would come to one of the facilitators and say, I am in extreme emotional distress, and the facilitators would send them back to meditate some more. And I'm like, okay. So here's the challenge, right? So in retreats, there are different levels of retreats. And retreats for people who know what they're doing, to know how to manage their own emotional distress, know how to walk their way through their own triggers and things like that. The answer, go meditate some more, is an actually valid one, because If you will just sit with your shit for long enough, if you have the tools, you will work your way through it, right? Totally valid response. But if somebody is coming up to you in emotional distress at a retreat, you need to discern whether or not they have the skill set to actually walk through that. Because if they don't, sending them back to be with more of the trauma that is clearly surfacing, right? Because, people did not kill themselves because they went on a meditative retreat. People killed themselves because they unearthed trauma that they had repressed on a meditative retreat. And then they didn't know how to deal with it. It was not the meditation that killed them, it was the trauma, right? So, or that caused the break, the psychological break. And so, these are the things and so I want to say this out loud. There are a lot of people leading retreats who have absolutely no training in how to lead a retreat. And that is problematic. And so today we're going to talk about how do you manage yourself while you're at a retreat if the person who's leading it does not have the skill set to manage it for you, because this happens. Your experience exceeds the experience of the retreat provider, and now they're at a loss, right? And I've seen this happen many, many times, whether it was a 2-hour class or whether it was a 5-day retreat. I have seen it happen many, many times in my life where the retreat facilitator was out of their depth. And so, this experience that was described in this article that Elizabeth sent to us, thank you, Elizabeth, was, all about the exceeding of the capacity of the facilitator, because that facilitator should never have sent that person back, right? The facilitator clearly just didn't have any experience other than in leading meditative retreats, right? And this is the challenge, right? Because you can lead one kind of retreat. It doesn't mean that people are only going to bring that to the retreat. You have to be prepared for whatever they bring to the retreat. And if you have no experience managing the stuff that might show up in that environment, in that container, you got a problem, right? And so I'm going to be switching back and forth between the facilitator perspective and the participant perspective on this, because I'm talking to different levels of people right now, right? So some of you are facilitators and you're listening from that angle, and some of you are participants and you're listening from that angle. So we're going to be talking from both perspectives today. So leading a retreat is not as simple as people think it is, right? There are all kinds of random things that show up, aside from the fact that you have to make sure that the venue works and that the food is good, because if the food is not good, people will not remember anything about the retreat except that the food sucked. Okay, just food is crucial, right? Because that is the comfort space for people going through transformational experiences. And if the comfort space provides no comfort, it then becomes a pinch point for the retreat, right? So you have to have those things. You have to have a safe container. You have to have, a lot of different pieces and parts. And that we're not talking about how to structure it today, but inside the container, people will bring whatever is up for them. And if you are not prepared for whatever is up for them, then you are going to drop them. That is the nature of doing this work. And if you as a participant get dropped and you are not capable of catching yourself, you're going to have a re-traumatization experience. Okay. And that's whether you're doing a meditation retreat or a yoga retreat or a deep transformational retreat. There are so many different angles on this. If you do, you and I were talking about fasting before we got on the call, Josh. That sort of thing will pull up all kinds of crap, right? And it just, when we do this work, whether we're coming at it from a wellness perspective or from a spiritual growth perspective, when you step into these containers that have you experience yourself in a different way, or become quiet to allow your thoughts that you keep shoved down on a daily basis to surface, then all kinds of stuff comes up with them. And that having the skill set to manage that is important before you go on a retreat. Okay. Now, let's talk about the skill set, because the skill set is its own thing, right? So a meditation retreat is good for quieting the mind. Now, your monkey mind is screaming and screaming and screaming and being like, blah, blah, blah. What about this? And what about that? And this could go horribly wrong. And that could go, well, you suck. And why are you so bad? And da, 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 blah, blah, blah. Right? That's the monkey mind. Right? And so when you quiet that monkey mind, you get underneath the surface, and all the things that your monkey mind is screaming to keep you from paying attention to, which are the underpinnings. You know, we think that the negative inner critic, right, is bad. We think that that's terrible. And it is. Don't get me wrong. It's not great. However, whatever's hiding underneath it is more significant and is closer to our core pain. Right? So I don't want to scare people, but I do want to warn people, right? So you need to be at a place where you know how to recognize your own triggers and you know how to step out of them if they get overwhelming. Okay? It is not necessary to dig up every piece of trauma that shows up. Some pieces of trauma we are ready for, other pieces we are not. Sometimes it shows up just to say, hey, I'm here. And you're like, okay, good to know. I'm going to put you away for the moment because I don't feel ready to deal with that. You need to trust your inner gut instinct, because if you look at something and it triggers a intense fear response from you, like overwhelming fear response, stay the fuck away from it. Okay? You are not ready for that yet. The overwhelming fear response tells you this is too dangerous for your psyche right now. It doesn't mean you'll never deal with it. It means that you need to develop more skills. It means that you need to develop more experience. It means that you need to do a smaller piece of the work first before you are ready to delve into that intense fear space. When you are ready to process a piece of trauma, it will show up and it will be a but not a response, right? Is a okay. This is a little scary, but I can manage it. But a is a no, run away, and trust that shit and run the fuck away. All right. I want to be really clear. This is not an endurance sport. It is not how far, how fast can I go? How deep can I dig? Do we do that eventually? Yes, we do. But when you have that response, it is telling you that your psyche is in danger, not your ego, your psyche. Okay? Your ego fears death, and
You
that
know,
is valid. Yeah,
you
go
put me
ahead.
back together after one set experience. I don't know if you remember this because you've helped put me back together after a bunch of wily shit at this point. But in particular, I was doing some breath work, and I don't really have a lot of experience with breath work, but I went full intensity for an hour and a half, like 90
Whew.
minutes into this. And like you're like, I don't know what you did, but you completely shredded your aura. And in the middle of it, 10 minutes in, I was like, I don't want to do this. But the warrior in me is like, we must. And at the end, I convinced myself I was okay. I was okay enough to get back to the hotel, and I was okay enough to land for 18 hours. But this is part of it, right? Like that, it hits on what you were just saying. Like I really damaged my psyche because I knew when I was signing the waiver, I was like, I don't think I'm in the mental space to do this. And I
Yeah.
was like, maybe this is, the other part of me is like, maybe this is exactly what you need then. And I learned a valuable lesson in that. And I just want to bring up something. One of the things that was different. I've only been to a handful of retreats. I just want to, state that I'm not an expert in this field at all. But the difference between the one that like you put on with the adventures and energetics and the other ones I went to is you had a very detailed questionnaire to find out exactly where people are at in their work, and that is something I'd like to see more of. Like because you knew what it is you were providing, and you knew it wasn't a beginner's retreat, and you wanted to know that people could handle things if things came up. And I want to say things came up for people, but you also knew how to help use the group energy to help people through. Like I don't want to give away too much about what happened there because it was fantastic. But there
Well, and
was
it'll
one
be
piece of
different.
work for somebody that like we were in a meditation and it brought up a lot of emotions, and you taught us to keen to help them through it as a group. And I thought that was one of the most beautiful parts of that retreat. So I just wanted to interject that in the middle of all this.
Yeah. And every retreat will be different for me because it's whatever people bring to the table, right? So and this is the piece, right? And breath work is one of those things that I really warn people about because again, breath work is not a beginner experience. And I don't care what the breath work practitioners tell you. I have seen way too many people shred themselves in breath work. And if you guys remember the experience of my friend who was super grounded as a person showing up while I was standing in line, and she had shredded her aura, she was ungrounded, and that was because she had gone to a breathwork experience. I have seen so many people shred themselves in breathwork. So I would not recommend breathwork to a not experienced crowd. And she was about as experienced as you are at the time, which is pretty damn experienced, right? And she still shredded herself. And so I think breathwork is one of the more dangerous places to go. Just because the breath is a powerful tool and it is an uncomfortable experience if you run into techne, which is you're hyper oxygenating and your body just goes into this, your fingers curl up. That was my experience of breath work, is my fingers curled up and I was stuck in this space and I felt very trapped in my own body. It was not good. Right. And so you can have those types of experience. And I've had other breathwork experiences that were not as bad as that. But I also managed it. Once I understood what techne was, I managed my breathing so that I didn't, when I started to feel that come on, I slowed my breathing so that it didn't come on, right? But this is something they didn't teach you in advance, at least the people I went to, right? And so, these sorts of things are a challenge, right? And there are very few certifications in these processes. I mean, there are some certifications for different types of work. But who knows what the person who's giving the certifications knows, right?
$7 on the internet, you can get certified in anything.
That's kind of my point. Yeah, right. So this is why it's so important to be able to manage yourself in the process. And so for retreats, I really recommend, and there are some beginner retreats out there, right? So like I used to go to Rites of Spring in Western Massachusetts with the Earth Spirit community. That is definitely a beginner's retreat. Okay, they've got a ceiling set on the energetics, so you can't go too far. They'd blow yourself up. They've got all of the experiences are set up at basically the beginner level. More experienced people can get a little bit more out of it, but there is a limit to how much you can do in that space because it's actually set up to be a beginner space by people who actually understand the energetics, right? So, that's a beginner space, but you want to make sure that the space that you're signing up for is related to the level that you're at. Because you do not want to walk in as a beginner to an intermediate space because there is an assumption that you have certain skill sets at that point. And if you're walking through a ritual, we had this experience early on. We were running mini retreats, like a 2-day where people would go home in between, whatever, at our house. And we had somebody who was there who was fairly new to the journey. And she walked in and we were doing a guardian at the gate ritual, right? So you had to be able to get yourself through the gate in order to enter. And she was lawyering. She was trying to lawyer her way through the gate, and she was trying to negotiate, right? And we're like, no, you can't negotiate your way through the gate. You're either ready or you're not. And so, go back and get ready, right? You need to put yourself in a space where you're ready. And, we gave advice and whatever, but when somebody comes into a ritual at that level trying to lawyer, they're early on in the process, and we adjusted for her to make sure that was the case. We made sure we negotiated, we communicated that, and and knew what was going on. And so it was fine, but it was a small event. In a large event, they're not going to be able to adjust for you, right? We had, I think there were like 8 or 10 people at that retreat. And so we could adjust. But in a 75 or 100 person retreat, they're not going to be able to adjust for you in general. I mean, a super skilled facilitator team could absolutely adjust for you, but on average, the average per group is going to be doing what they're told to do, and they're going to be serving in their role, and they're going to be doing what they're doing, and that's what it is, right?
Can we talk about those numbers for a second? Like as far as like, what do you think, like as a safe number of people? Like I feel like that 15 number seems like a real sweet spot. Like, I have for once again, I just want to say I've never experienced a larger retreat, so I have nothing to base that off of. But
Yeah.
like it feels like the energetics of smaller groups, because even when they're smaller than that, I feel more transformation. So do you
Yeah.
feel like there's a cap on that, or you were
No,
talking about additional facilitators, so
yeah. So here's the thing, right? The way you design a retreat is different for a small group than for a large group, or even for a medium group, right? At a small group level, you're doing a lot of individualized work. Everybody's going through the same process with the same people, and you're doing the work in the moment. And in that case, a lot of the people are participating in other people's experiences, right? And like the keening, as you were talking about, we also did a blessing ceremony where we all provided blessings for each other and things like that. In a large scale, you can't do that. It's just not physically possible, right? However, on a large scale, you do a different format, right? So you do stations. And so you have a bunch of different facilitators running a bunch of different stations, and you run people through the stations. You just have to make sure there aren't pinch points. And you do stations, and so that can be just as powerful as a smaller group environment. It's just differently powerful, right? So Twilight Covenant is a good example. They do a large group ritual at the end where everybody walks through and does this experiential process where they walk through. It's sort of like a live action guided journey, right? Um, and that works great so long as you don't have pinch points again. And the pinch points are really tough you got to know what you're doing to not have a pinch point. A pinch point for me, when I say that, means that you have people uh, lining up to get through a process. You want it to be a smooth process where people don't have a wait time, because the wait time takes them out of their own experience, right? But you also have to have catchers, right? You have to have catchers whose job it is to catch the people who wander off the path, because they will, right? I'm personally responsible for that because in one of my rituals that I went to with Earth Spirit Community in Twilight Covenant, I walked off the path and I was having a long, in-depth conversation with the Queen of the Fairies. And the guy who was the catcher was in a Hern costume. He was wearing Hern, he was embodying Hern. And he kept coming up to me, and I'm like, I am having a conversation with the Queen of the Fairies, and you will wait until I am done. And he was just like, I got you. But he was there with me and stayed with me to make sure I didn't wander off the path, right? Because that sort of thing can happen. Okay, but you have to have those people, which means that the larger group scenarios require many people. You need at least one facilitator for every 10 people that are on site. And that allows you the flexibility to be able to have people wandering around and doing stuff. And it also gives people time off, which is the other important thing. If you're doing a 5-day retreat, your facilitators need some time off. They need, 2 or 3 hours to themselves every day in order to be able to reset so that they're not on duty 24/7, right? Because you never know when you're going to get woken up in the middle of the night with somebody having a meltdown. You're like, oh, okay, I'm here. What's up? Right. So that sort of thing happens. Anyway, so, you can do this in different size environments, right? But if you're walking into a large group environment, and this is one of those things. So like the Millionaire Mind, which I don't think is happening anymore, but it happened back in the early 2000s. Um, T. Harv Eker had a program that he ran that I can't remember what it was called, like the Alchemist or something. I don't know. The Wizard. He called it Wizard training. And it was effectively, he was doing some shamanic work, right, with people. He integrated some shamanic elements into the Millionaire Mind. Now, the Millionaire Mind would have anywhere from 300 to 1,000 people in the room. That is an insane number of people. And they had volunteers who were there to facilitate the experience, right? And what he did, and it was kind of brilliant and kind of irresponsible at the same time. So we'll see. But
We're
kind of
wizards,
brilliant.
Harry. That's what we do.
Yeah, it was very shamanic, right? But he did this thing where he would walk around with people. And he'd have all these facilitators hand out these forms, and you were working in groups of like 10, right? And so he would hand out these very inflammatory forms about how they were not responsible for any deaths that could occur and that they'd had experiences where things had gone through people's necks and they had to go to the hospital. I mean, just horrific stuff that you had to sign off on in order to do the exercise. And it was designed, and I saw through it as I was doing this. I'm like, wow, this is designed to bring all your fears up, right? Because if this were true, he would have been sued out of experience, out of his life, and he would have, it would have been terrible, right? And then they would give you safety goggles, and they would give you this. They called it an arrow, but it was just a piece of doweling, right? And you were to put it at the point in your neck, right where there's a notch, right at the base of your neck, and you were supposed to post it right there. And then somebody else was supposed to hold their hand still, and you were supposed to walk into it and until it broke. And it was you claiming your power over fear, basically. And he amped up the fear to make sure it was really, really there. And it was very vulnerable feeling. But there was a person in our group who completely melted down. The volunteers were untrained. Their only job was to keep you on task. They did not know how to handle the meltdowns. They did not know how to walk somebody through the process. And I ended up facilitating for her, which I was happy to do. But not every group had a me in it, right? And so, you're just sitting there and you're like, what the hell, right? Because, that's why I'm saying it was brilliant, but it was also irresponsible because there weren't trained staff members to take care of the people. And so that's the balance, right? And so, and this happened in a bunch of his stuff. I walked and I did the train the trainer program with him and watched somebody come out having done an exercise and they shredded their aura. And I just happened to come out at the same time as them and we knew each other. And I was like, whoa, hold on, let me help you. She stepped into a new way of being, but she shredded herself in the process. And so there was nobody there to sort of put her back together again. And so, I held the space and then there's a volunteer who's coming up trying to push us back into the rooms. And I'm like, I got my hand out. I'm like, shut the fuck up, right? I am fixing what you guys have not provided anybody to do. And I'm providing a service for a program I'm paying for somebody else. So you need to shut up and walk away. Because I am not dealing with you. I'm managing for her, right? You are not my priority. And we will be back in the room when we fucking feel like it, right? It's just like, and that's the sort of thing that happens at some of the events, right? Now, the Human Awareness Institute, on the other hand, brilliant. They train their people. They do beautiful jobs, right? I remember going to a Human Awareness Institute experience and, I had determined that I was not facilitating for anybody else. And that was my commitment, right? And there was this one person who seemed to constantly be catching the person who was melting down next to me. It's like the universe was like, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? Because, here's one, here's one, here's one. And I'm like, no, this is for me. I'm not doing this. I'm doing it for me. I'm going to let other people manage because I'm doing this for me. And at the end of the experience, the woman walked up to me and she said, I'm so sorry. I feel like I was there for everybody but you And I was always catching the person next to you. I said, you don't understand. Every time you caught the person next to me, you were helping me because I didn't have to. And that was my commitment. Right. And so, as a facilitator, she was like, oh, that's so cool. Right. But they're trained. They understand how to deal with it. They've managed it. They've done their own work. And so they're still volunteers, but they're volunteers from within the community who have already done the work and they get it. Right. So that's a different model. Right. And so when you're doing this stuff, you need to be able to manage your own experience. So you have to recognize your own patterns. So for me, my pattern was we've talked about me doing the cream. There was no cream for my coffee and the tears, right? And I was abdicating responsibility for taking care of myself to the facilitators, right? And I was like, okay, it's time for me to step up and be an adult and bring my own damn creamer for Sunday because I know they're going to run out, right? And I would just bring a creamer. I'd bring a quart of cream for the final day, and I would have enough for my coffee and enough to share, right? And, that was one of my things, is to recognize my patterns, right? And so my pattern was to catch the people who were next to me. And I was like, no, that's how I take myself out of my own experience. I'm going to be in my own experience and allow other people to do what they're capable of doing, right? And so that was one of my patterns. You have to start to recognize your own patterns if you're going to get benefit out of doing retreats. I've done so many retreats. Oh my God, so many retreats, right? And so there are certain things that you have to be good at in order to survive a retreat well, right? So the first thing is you want to learn how to manage your own emotional state. You need to recognize your own triggers and know how to manage those. So if you are easily overwhelmed by a particular trigger, you need to know to stay away from it, right? If you are easily triggered, or if you're accidentally triggered, you need to know how to manage that. You need to be like, wow, I'm freaking triggered. I'm going to walk away from this situation and go back to my room and have some stillness and maybe ask for some help, right? Asking for help is a really valuable skill. If the help doesn't help, then you need to know what to do in that scenario, right? And a lot of times it's ask somebody different. Because just because one person doesn't know how to manage it for you or help you with it, doesn't mean that somebody else in the group doesn't. Okay. If there's more than one facilitator, ask for help again. If the facilitators are useless to you, then start asking your fellow participants for help. Get the help you need. If you cannot get the help you need on site, then it's time to leave. Okay. Take care of you. The core thing is for you to realize that you are responsible for you. Do not hand over responsibility for your well-being to somebody else. So this is what happened when James Ray's people set up the sweat lodges badly. He had trained people to do it in a specific way, and somebody was an idiot and put a plastic tarp in the sweat lodge, and the plastic tarp started outgassing toxic fumes into the sweat lodge, and people were trying to leave, and the person who was running it encouraged them to stay in, which is their job, to encourage them to stay in. They did not know that there were toxic fumes in there. But the people trusted the person at the door and stayed in, even though they could feel that, and they died. Right? Trust your gut. If you know something's wrong, get out. Right? Do not trust somebody else over yourself. Okay? There's a difference between having an emotional reaction and having a physical reaction. Right? And I hate sweat lodges because I am not a hot person. I've done one sweat lodge in my life, and I spent the entire time laying on the ground, breathing air from underneath the tent.
Well, as somebody who has had the blessing of being in your energy field for an energy review, I don't think you need a sweat lodge. You're running about 50 degrees hotter than anybody I've ever worked with.
Thank you. I can't take the heat. I don't do it well. There's a reason I live at 3,500 feet here in Panama. I can't do the heat, right? And I still have an air conditioner here because I run very hot. But when you do this work, the core answer is always trust your gut. Your gut knows if you're in the right place. Your gut knows if you're in danger. Your gut knows. Now, your head may go, blah, 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 blah. That is not the thing to listen to. Okay. Your head going blah, 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 blah is not the thing to listen to. But the intense, overwhelming fear, stay the fuck away from it. Right? The sense of massive dread, stay the fuck away from it. Your gut going, oh, this is a bad idea. Stay away from it. Okay. This is not you wimping out. I'm talking to all you warriors out there. I'm going to do it no matter what. As Josh looks over his shoulders.
Yeah, you guys listen up,
I'm talking to you because our warrior identity says, I want to do this and I'm going to do it right and I'm going to do it well and I'm going to do it beyond what everybody else can do because I'm tough and I can take it and I'm strong and blah, blah, blah. The grizzled old warrior knows to trust the sense of impending doom. Be the grizzled old warrior, not the young buck. Okay. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just trying to prepare you. Right. And when your boundaries are being exceeded, so like I went to a Tantra workshop where they were asking people to get naked in the room and they didn't close the fucking windows. They didn't close the blinds and they didn't lock the door. And there were roommates who came in partway through the experience while people were partially unclothed. That's an unsafe environment. Randos walking in the door when you're already in your space, that is not okay. Right? So this sort of thing is problematic. And you need to protect yourself in that environment. If they don't have everybody put their phones away and you're expected to get naked or partially naked, that's a problem too. You don't want people taking naked pictures of you or putting videos up on the internet. Trust your own experience. Be safe. Right? So that is the sort of thing that you need to do. And that's true whether you're in a ritual space or whether you're in a personal space. I went to a Four Seasons hotel spa and there were girls. Now, in a spa like that, you usually go naked into the pools, right? But there were girls in the pool who were not naked. They were in their bathing suits and they were Instagramming. And I'm walking in naked. Now, to their credit, I said, hey, ladies, this is not a space for filming. You're normally supposed to be naked in here. And they were like, oh, I'm so sorry. And, we caught you in the back. I'll delete it. They were very good about it. Right. But there were no signs anywhere that said you can't film. Okay. That was poor space management. Right. So, and that's a Four Seasons hotel. Who knew? Right. But this is what I'm saying. You need to maintain your own environment and you need to say something unless you end up in the background naked in somebody's video, right? It's not good, right? So this is about managing your own energy. This is about managing your own experience. This is about trusting your gut, being willing to confront if necessary, and moving forward. So I think if there's anything else I want to say, hold on. Anything you want to add, Josh?
No, I mean, like I said, I don't have a lot of experience with retreats, so this has kind of been very informative for me. Like I said, I've only been to a handful, and I think you kind of said it all. As someone who's been to a lot, facilitated a lot, I don't really know. In addition, what I can add to this with my minimal experience in this particular subject.
Well, so this is the challenge, right? Is that people want to run retreats because they've been to them and they're like, oh, I'll take an element of this and an element of that and whatever. And that's all well and fine. I mean, I learned a lot of how I do my retreats from watching other people do theirs. So, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I also understand the forces that work underneath those things, right? It's one thing to just do what other people do and hope it works, and it's another thing to do what you saw somebody else do because you understand why it worked, how it worked, what it was about, and then you know how to manage it, right? I see way too many people just sort of stealing other people's processes, not understanding the processes. And that is problematic. So, um, you know, a good retreat is at its core, first and foremost, a safe space. And if the container is not safe, then you're not going to do well. I told a story way back in the podcast where a guy went to a shamanic retreat weekend and he just could only go so far. He's like, "Yeah, I figured out it wasn't for me." And I'm like, "Dude, you are absolutely psychic. You are absolutely capable of doing this. What you were experiencing was an automatic shutdown because you were in an unsafe container. This was not about you. This was about the container you were in." And he's like, "What container?" And I was like, "Yes, exactly. Because I'm feeling into the energy and there was no container set. And therefore, anything they opened up to would have brought in anything possible, any sort of thing that could have been possible, which could have been all kinds of icky entities and things like that." And I'm like, "You self regulated because at some level you understood that. And this is not about your abilities,
I
right?"
mean, I've talked about this one before. With the first retreat I went to, they started with a meditation and opening up the neck portal, and I looked up. I was like, "Well, absolutely fucking not." And I looked at the practitioner right in the eye, and I winked at her because I knew. And after that, my protections were on high. But I was also, like this was still a couple of years ago. So at the same time, I was like, maybe I don't know, but I did know. And that's why I
Yeah.
was on high alert the rest of the weekend. And I've had a
Yeah.
lot of interesting things happen since then, in regards to that particular area. But, things like that, like absolutely trust your intuition, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm not opening up my neck portal for, that port for anybody, seeing as how most of the entities I pull are latched right there.
Yes.
So,
Well, and when he's talking about the neck portal, he's talking about the one at the base of the skull, right? Because that is the possession point, right?
right.
And so opening that up is generally not recommended.
I don't recommend it.
Like,
I mean, like
how
I
about
I
no?
did some research after that because I wanted to know. And there are people that come out of certain lineages that believe that. It's more was it Egyptian? That work with that. But I don't think that particular practitioner knew that. And it is what it is. Like the whole way that it was set up was very icky to me, like the connecting to the portal, then to the third eye, and then to the heart. I was like, like none of that seems to my understanding of energy is far different than what I'm experiencing in this particular moment. So no judgment, just a discernment based on
Yeah.
what I've witnessed in my
And
work.
I want to be clear, it's not that most people are malicious in this. It is not. Don't get me wrong, there are some malicious people out there, and they are taking advantage of the retreat environment to try and, suck you in and, whatever. But those people are like maybe 5 to 10% of the market, right? The the challenge is that there's a lot of people who are uneducated and they are running events in a way that they do not have the skill set to deal with the things that may come up and or to actually design a retreat properly.
I think that's one of the dangers of the uptick in AI, right? Like people can just be like, they can tap in, hey, like, what does the structure of a good retreat look like? You
Oh
have a
God.
great internet following, and boom, like now you are, yeah. Like I mean, I see this, I see an uptick in this because like once you understand how AI talks and AI works, you can see it in everybody's work weaved in. And I'm like, I mean, it's a fine line.
Yeah. I would not. Yeah. God, the last thing I would do is ask AI what the structure of a good
A lot
retreat
of
is,
people do though.
because quite frankly, I have never actually seen it listed anywhere. I've never seen anybody publish anything about it. I mean, Kathy is a PhD. She did her PhD work in transformational dynamics. That was her dissertation title. And she actually codified through her study of 11 years of what creates and what makes lasting transformation in group environments. So she actually created the model that does that. Something I didn't know about PhD work is that in order to get a PhD, you have to add to the body of knowledge of the world. You have to do something no one has done before. And I was like, ooh, well, shit, that's a high bar. I had no idea that was the case. And so that was her contribution. She married Western esotericism, which is a literature review, with theater anthropology, which is how ritual happens, right? With I think it was personal transformation, right? And so she married those three fields of study. They said she did three different dissertations at once and put them all together to create a 660-page dissertation that she had people on her committee said reading the dissertation changed them. That's how significant the work she did was. And so, it's important to know how things work and how they work, right? And this is where, she and I have worked together for 20 years doing this kind of work. And so, this is my point. Be careful who you go to a retreat with. Be able to manage your own emotions, be able to manage yourself, be willing to take care of your own safety, be willing to leave if necessary, and brook no bullshit. Right? So if somebody's answer to your emotional distress is go back and do more of the thing that caused you the emotional distress, it's time to leave or get somebody else's opinion, right? Ask somebody else. And if you can get no help, then it's time to leave and get the help you need, right? So that's what I have to say. And thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And remember that what you focus on expands. What you intend is what you create. So choose wisely.